Good afternoon. It's June 21st, the summer solstice, and this is to my little friends. Voting in elections is one of the most sacred rights that we possess in a free society. And that's why it is critically important that how that voting is conducted must be fair and done in such a manner as to ensure trust by the voting public that the results are tabulated correctly. In the past several elections, we've had people who have lost that election cry foul and claim they did not really lose, but rather the election was stolen from them. The loudest claims on this front have come from Donald Trump. He has fostered the idea that he really won the 2020 presidential election and that it was unjustly stolen from him. His pronouncements on this subject have resonated with many of his supporters, and they have become election deniers. This question was raised with the former president in an interview with Bret Baier of Fox News, and once again, Trump claimed that he not only won the 2020 election, but he won it by a lot. In the midterm elections of 2022, we watched many of his acolytes make this claim, and one by one we saw the public reject their claims, and those running for office while supporting the former president's election denial claims go down to defeat. It happened in the Pennsylvania Senate race, it happened in the Georgia Senate race, and it happened particularly in Arizona, where the two Republican candidates, Blake Masters for Senate and Kari Lake for governor, both lost elections that better candidates on their party's ticket would probably have won. And as I said, election deniers have existed during other elections as well. I think this all started in the presidential race in the year 2000 between Democratic candidate Al Gore and the winning candidate on the Republican side, George W. Bush. It was a very close election, and it came down to counting the votes in the state of Florida. The Supreme Court had to finally intervene and mandate that the count be completed and a winner declared. In the end, George W. Bush was declared the winner of the Florida electoral votes, thus giving him the White House. Democrats denied that he really won and claimed he had stolen the election from them. Yet every recount of the votes in Florida showed Bush winning by a narrow margin. But like Republicans who denied that Trump lost, Democrats at that time denied that Bush had won. In 2016, when Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, many Democrats said he was an illegitimate president and that he had stolen the election from Mrs. Clinton. And I've long said that the two most surprised people on that night were Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Clinton was sure she was going to win and even failed to campaign in key states like Wisconsin and Michigan, allowing Trump to win those states and thus win the election. Quote, he lost the election and he was put into office because the Russians interfered on his behalf. That was according to ex-President Jimmy Carter, who said that in 2019, continuing to deny Trump's victory 3 years after the election. He knows he's an illegitimate president, said Clinton almost 3 years later. She repeated this sentiment in 2020, telling the Atlantic the election, quote, was not on the level. And again, when she called Trump's win illegitimate, she piled on this by saying, quote, you can run the best campaign, you can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you. Clearly referring to how she saw her 2016 campaign. Congressman and civil rights icon John Lewis, who has now passed away, went even further in 2017 saying, quote, I don't see Trump as a legitimate president. I think the Russians participated in helping this man get elected, end quote. Multiple Democrats in Congress echoed this claim, and the result was a 2-year investigation of whether Russian operatives colluded with the Trump campaign, and in the end it produced nothing, and in fact showed that the document used to initiate the investigation, the so-called Steele dossier, was nothing more than a fabrication by a former British intelligence agent working at a Washington, D.C. think tank, and that he had been paid to produce this document by the Clinton campaign. This tantrum by Hillary Clinton and her supporters sowed the seeds of doubt and discontent by voters. It allowed Donald Trump to make his spurious claims 4 years later. But the point I'm making is that Democrats engaged in election denial as much as Trump's Republican supporters. The result is way too many of the voters believe the elections are not fair and blame the other side when their candidate loses. And that brings us to the present. And the question that poses itself is how do we restore faith by the electorate that our process is fair and being done correctly? In a utopian world, we would return to in-person voting and restrict mailed ballots to strict scrutiny for legitimate absentee reasons. But that's not going to occur, and mail-in ballots are not going away. And I have said that Republicans need to embrace this concept and ensure that their voters mail in their ballots. Waiting until election day to vote in person may be something you feel is the correct way to do, but you run the risk of not having that vote counted. I say this because a mail-in ballot is a sure vote. Waiting until election day may find some hurdle to the voter getting to the polls. It could be weather, illness, or suddenly being called out of town. Democrats have acknowledged that mail-in ballots are the way to go, and they're doing everything they can to ensure that people vote that way. They ignore, purposely I think, the potential problems with this massive method of voting. By example, elderly people who are not in control of their faculties but registered to vote may have someone else filling out their ballot. This is a potential major problem in facilities like long-term health care nursing homes. A classic example of Democrats seeking to make this the norm, as opposed to the exception, is occurring in the state of New York right now. The Constitution of the state of New York mandates that absentee ballots are reserved for residents who are out of their county or New York City on election day, as well as those who can't appear personally at the polls because of illness or physical disability. And 2 years ago, in a real shock to the Democrats, the electorate rejected a proposed constitutional amendment that would have loosened the rules and permitted no-excuse absentee voting. The measure failed 45% to 55%. Yet the politicians in Albany must think the dummies who vote don't know what's good for them. This month, the legislature passed a bill to let anyone vote by mail. And you can be sure it will be tested in court. The Wall Street Journal pointed out that the governor, Kathy Hochul, should veto the bill just out of respect for the electorate. But I'm not going to hold my breath for that to occur. But some way, somehow, we have to find a solution to this problem, or every election will be a repeat where the loser denies the results and claims the other side used some sort of fraud to win the election. You can be sure that if Trump does not get the nomination or lose a general election, he will make this claim. That's not good for Republicans and not good for the country. What should occur is that reasonable Democrats should make it plain that Bush won in 2000 and Trump won in 2016, and then Republicans should repudiate any of Trump's claims about 2020 and in the future. It's been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, hit the subscribe button or recommend it to your friends. And if you have a comment, please make it. I'd like to hear from you.